Welcome back to the Map for College learning community. My name is Ernest Manelli, founder of Map for College. This video addresses the distinctions between the SAT and the ACT and the guiding principles that should inform and shape your decision as you consider which standardized test may be better for you as a student and as a learner based on your learning profile and your ability to perform within a testing format. And this is within the context of the understanding that there still are many colleges and universities that have a test optional policy, but many students do choose to submit tests. And so if you are considering these standardized testing formats, I would like to provide my perspective professionally regarding the distinctions and differences within and among the two tests. So the SAT really plays to the strengths of students who are accustomed to working out solutions in mathematics, taking their time, being deliberate while not taking too much time on math problem solving, but still, if you are the type of learner in mathematics who prefers to map things out rather than taking shortcuts along the way, sure, you can take shortcuts with certain problem-based solutions that are early in a particular section that might be a little bit easier on the scale of difficulty. But for the most part, there are open response questions on the SAT, whereas there are not on the ACT. So the SAT has open response questions at the end of Section 3 and at the end of Section 4, and there are no multiple choice options to guide you, so you have to do the figuring and the problem solving and the sketch work for those. And many students who prefer the SAT mathematics, I happen to be among those students. When I was a high school student, the SAT was much better for me as a format because I preferred to make math visual. I like to sketch things. I was not the fastest problem solution student, but I was deliberate. I followed the steps, and it's not to say that you can't do those same things in the ACT. You certainly can, but the time parameter is such that with SAT Math, Section 3, you have 25 minutes for 20 questions. For SAT Section 4 Math, you have 55 minutes for 38 questions. So all told, you have an aggregate between the two sections, and you have to take them distinctly, so please understand that. But you have 58 questions, and you have 80 minutes to solve them in the aggregate. Compare that with the ACT, where you have 60 questions and 60 minutes. So it's a little bit more of a track meet. Certainly, there are many questions on ACT Math that would behoove you to do the problem solving, do the sketch work, narrow down the process of elimination, and then finally come up with the answer that makes the most sense. That absolutely is a strategy that you would follow on either test. It's simply that the time parameter, your approach to each of the two formats would be very different. You would need to skip more aggressively, and what I mean by that is that let's say you hit a rough patch, you hit a problem that you just don't initially know how to approach it. If you're on the ACT and you get to problem number, 15, and you're like, oh, I haven't seen that in a while, just skip it and move on to problem number 16. Just make sure you move to problem number 60 in the answer sheet as well. But on the ACT, you have to skip very aggressively because the ACT doesn't give you much wiggle room with time. Whereas the SAT, you can dive into a problem a little bit and then skip. I would still recommend skipping more aggressively on either test format when it comes to math, because for most math questions, they're sort of like independent contractors in the sense that question number 1 might be algebra, question number 2 might be geometry, question 3 might be probability. In other words, unlike a reading comprehension passage or a grammar-based passage that is more cohesive and more connected around a topic or a theme, the math sections on these standardized tests, now there are combination questions where it will say, question 17 through 19 relate to the following graph or chart. So there are certain combination questions that work in concert with each other. But for the most part, well over 90% of the math questions are going to be independent contractors. In other words, you're bouncing from topic to topic as you go through the test. So it really doesn't disrupt your learning to implement what I would call aggressive skipping. And the reason that helps you is you want to put the time dynamic toward the questions that you have the highest probability of answering, because on either test format, SAT or ACT, you're dealing with the same number of raw points. In other words, the most challenging question is worth the same raw point as the least challenging question from your skill set perspective, based on what your strengths are. So getting back to the macro topic of SAT, ACT math, another consideration would be that the ACT math content goes deeper into the high school curriculum. So in other words, you will see a little bit more pre-calculus concepts. You will see some initial calculus concepts. You will see things like logarithms on the ACT that you really don't see on the SAT. The SAT is clustered around algebra and geometry. It's clustered around what most students would find a representation of the mid-level of high school math. Now, the complexity and some of the nuance of the wording of the questions, some of the word problems on either test format tend to be tricky, but the SAT tends to throw a few more curveballs at the student. So SAT math tends to be a little bit more nuanced, a little bit more detail-oriented on the word problems, but you have that extra time parameter within which to work. ACT math goes deeper into the curriculum. The questions are a little bit more straightforward. Another feature that is logistical in nature is that under the current format, ACT has 5 answer choices on the multiple choice. SAT has 4 answer choices on the multiple choice. But for the most part, based on the number of viable answer choices, like when you're going through either test format, there are going to be some answer choices within a problem that just don't match, or they would represent a misstep. Like if you took the wrong operation mathematically and went in a certain direction, you might get a number that deviates from the other cluster of numbers. So, in terms of the quality of the answer choices, that quality is pretty comparable between both tests. Getting onto the reading and the grammar, what I call the grammar, the quality of writing sections, in general, the ACT does mirror that slightly quicker pace, but at the same time, ACT reading, ACT writing, quality of writing sections, they're fairly comparable content-wise to the SAT verbal sections. So in other words, the verbal sections are fairly comparable. It's just that the SAT verbal might be it gives you a little bit more wiggle room on the time parameter. Not a whole lot, but if you need a little bit more forgiveness on the reading comprehension and the reading speed angle, you might defer over to the SAT, but you want to give it a shot and take some practice questions and practice passages. Now, some students and families will say, well, the ACT has a science section. If you have really strong background information and knowledge in science, that could come into play on the science section, but for the most part, I have found that students who have really strong reading comprehension skills tend, with informational-based text, like nonfiction passages, informational text, graphs, charts, tables, information, students who are really good at sort of capturing the details of a nonfiction passage, they also tend to be very proficient with the science section, because the science section essentially boils down to a series of short nonfiction informational-based passages. So in general, the ACT has a little bit deeper content, especially on the math, moves at a quicker pace, but some of the questions are more streamlined. The SAT has a little bit more nuance, but gives you a little bit more forgiveness on the time parameter. And if you'd like to discuss your options with regard to standardized testing, we'd be happy to help you. Just feel free to contact us. Our website is mapforcollege.com. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. Have a great day.